Here we are again at the Griffin Pub in Shoreditch, our local, just around the corner from Revving HQ, for our next instalment of our pubcast. Delighted to be joined by Andrew Mole, the CEO and co-founder of pubX,
Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
and my co-founder and our COO, David Mandeno.
Thanks, Chris. Really good to have you here today, Andrew.
So this is all about agentic advertising. It's a hot topic, something that a lot of people know a little bit about, but not a lot of people know a lot about. And I think it's one of those topics that we can really dig into today. pubX.
A lot of people are talking about Agentic,
Yeah, it's a good clarification.
but do a lot of people know about it?
Exactly. And I think that's today, I think we'll probably go back to basics a bit, because I think a lot of our audience is probably a little bit baffled by what's going on at the moment. And then we can really ramp it up, because pubX is right at the cutting edge of what's going on in this market. And yeah, exciting to get into that today. So I think first thing, maybe let's just go back to basics. What is agentic advertising?
Yeah.
And why are we at a position in the market where now's the time for this to be really making a difference?
Yeah. So I think in its purest form, agentic advertising is an agent, so an LLM, as you would know, it's like Claude, for example, operating on behalf of the advertiser and transacting with an agent LLM that operates on behalf of the publisher. So it's the fundamental advertising supply chain, but where an agent starts and an agent ends a campaign, they converse between those points and they replace a lot of the systems that currently exist. I think we're here now because agentic is in our world. So unlike a lot of changes that happen in ad tech, agentic has come from the wider world. So Anthropic, almost $1 trillion business, OpenAI. This technology is disintermediating all industries. We have a very data-rich industry that's currently operated by people using platforms. And so agentic comes in, and this is kind of a natural fit for that. So you can see where agentic would work within the ad tech ecosystem, create efficiencies and improve the process and outcomes. And this is why we think ad tech is a ripe industry for this introduction.
Certainly 15 years ago, digital advertising went through this massive shift with programmatic coming in, and it was a very hot sector. It's then been going through a process, and there's been obviously walled gardens and cookies and a bunch of things going on. But recently, everyone is now talking about agentic. Ad tech is sexy again. There's a lot of investment going into that sector. Why do you think agentic is so important for the digital advertising ecosystem? Why is and who is it most important for, and what problem is it really solving?
Yeah. So, well, I think, you've mentioned programmatic. I think it solves a lot of the problems of programmatic. So this was another entry in ad tech that had a great deal of promise and then was kind of watered down because it still had to interface with humans. So the real losers in programmatic were publishers who were promised the opportunity to scale their data and audiences, and in reality just created this homogenous pressure on their inventory. So they had to compete with each other. For me, like a big structural shift was when SSPs didn't have a one-to-one relationship with publishers, and all SSPs could represent all inventory. And at that point, it becomes a race to the bottom to clear, not to win at the best price. And so that has really prejudiced the industry against publishers over the last kind of 15 years. And we think agentic fixes that because it solves the human capital problem, which is not that people shouldn't be in the industry and do a great job, because absolutely they should be. But humans are limited by scale. So if you think of a current DSP, for example, it still requires a human trader to go in, manage the deals that are running across it. And there's only so many that anyone can manage. In an industry under pressure, where traders have to do more, ad ops people at publishers have to do more, what you lose there is kind of finessing or optimization. So it's kind of get the job done as well as you can versus get the best job done. And we say agentic has been get the best job done because our buying agent could speak to our seller agent or to a third-party seller agent, and it can run 1,000 deal IDs simultaneously to find the best one that's transacting for the advertiser's outcome at the best rate for the publisher. So we think publishers are the real winners as a result of this, but it's a feedback loop and it's an ecosystem. So if it doesn't work for both sides, it's not going to get accepted.
Is it like the precision and the scale that are the two things that this enables the industry to do that hasn't been great at before?
Yeah, I think so. So if you imagine a publisher has an audience, but that audience is distributed, standard distribution, they might have one person that would be a great fit for a deal that's running by an agency, but they would never get that person, that impression, that bit of data into that deal, because the publisher salesperson can't sell a deal of one to a global holdco. So what it does, and what we're doing with our inventory agent, is aggregating that data together, aggregating those impressions together to create segments that represent, or can represent, and have to, multiple publishers, multiple data providers, to get total optimization at scale. So you get exactly the right audience scaled into those segments.
Yeah. So you talk about benefiting publishers. Obviously it requires both buyers and sellers in Agentic to be transacting for this to really work. What do you see as the main impact to publishers, and what do you see as the main impact to buyers or advertisers from Agentic?
Well, there's a twofold approach. So there's one that I've been talking about, which is the technical benefit for publishers, which is scaling audiences. You would expect to receive increased revenue as a result. So you're taking what might go remnant or programmatic and you're making it direct. But then there's a second benefit for publishers, which is also felt for advertisers, which is within an agentic ecosystem, you don't need the platforms that have existed currently to transact advertising. So what pubX does is collapse what currently would be done by a DSP and currently be done by an SSP into a single platform, which of course, even beyond anything else, causes an enormous cost efficiency, because the advertiser doesn't need to pay the DSP and the publisher doesn't need to pay the SSP. So we're collapsing that function into one stack. Because we've built it agentic up, the technology in one layer costs less than either layer used to cost. So there's a massive cost efficiency saving there, and that money goes into active media. So then the net beneficiary of that is the advertiser, who sees more spend in active media. Obviously the publisher's happy, they've made more money, but also more of that money didn't flow into a static platform fee, but it joined the campaign, which you would expect drives better results for the advertiser. So what we want to see is CMOs going, okay, well, wow, this is actually really working now. I want to increase my budgets because I can actually see the effectiveness. The flip side of that is you can measure things better. So an agent can measure everything that happened within the campaign. It can look at every impression, track it back, read through server logs, do downstream attribution modeling, media mix modeling. And you can look at this and go, okay, I really know where spend is working. And in real time, I'm optimizing this. Maybe this publisher has a really great performing segment at 4 a.m. I've noticed that in the data. I'm going to increase spend there then I'm going to move it elsewhere. And you get this kind of, I guess this is like the panacea that programmatic was pitched as, which was still limited by the fact that a human had to do it, which is, again, not a criticism of a person. They just don't have the capacity to 24/7 monitor thousands, if not millions of data points. So it's a double-sided benefit for the ecosystem.
Yeah. And this, obviously the benefits sound compelling to both publishers and advertisers then, and very much a win-win, and increased cost efficiency and better monetization and improved efficiency around that. How much of it today is the vision and the goal of what Agentic promises versus the reality of where we currently are today with, I guess, adoption, but also, what are those barriers to adoption as well?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question, and that's kind of the ad tech question, right? I think what we're trying to do is to shrink the gap between hype and reality as much as possible, two ways. One, by delivering reality, but two, by not overhyping. I think there is, as there always is in ad tech, a small piece of information anecdotally spools up into a wave. We're kind of allergic to that. We want to build great technology first. But you're right, there is a delta. I think it is narrowing. I think ultimately, this is something that's driven by fundamental economics. So it's on a sound footing to start with. It does improve the economic aspects of a $1 trillion plus supply chain. So it has to be taken seriously. But then I think delivering this is key, and the way of delivering this is key. I think a few people have kind of shot out of the gate early and maybe slightly confused the messaging. And what we think our job is to work particularly with publishers to make sure this isn't just another snake oil salesperson.
And what I love is it's that ground up approach, is we're looking at the bottom, what the publishers need, and serving that up the chain. As I've felt for many years, it's been transitioned the other way around. Is like, all these technology platforms sort of selling their services downstream and basically going, this is the best thing since sliced bread, this is new, you've got to take it, otherwise X, Y, and Z will happen.
Yeah.
And I like the fact we're building it that way up. And actually, you need the buy-in of them first and foremost before you can really deliver the right product.
100%. I mean, for us, publishers are value creators, right? They have environments on the web. And this goes to any sell-side platform, so CTV as well, influencers, anyone. But it's the people who create value. They build audiences, they have brands, they have environments in which advertisers want to buy advertising. And yet, for no obvious reason, they've been punished for the last 15 plus years, go back to the start of the web.
Yep.
Or not the very start, but so slightly after the dot-com burst. So we think publishers are the originators of value in the ecosystem. And then the second most important thing is liquidity into that value. And the things in the middle have been a necessary step to drive that. But those are the fungible parts. Those are the elements that will transition over time as the industry evolves. And we think the fundamental unit is going to be the person who spends money on media, typically an agency that have an amazing purpose, and the publisher. So that's our sort of fundamental starting point.
And I think we've created layers and layers of complexity over the last few years to try and self-serve downstream to publishers rather than saying, well, are we actually giving them what they really need? And this for me feels like, albeit the underlying technology is extremely complicated and we're still in the foothills of developing that, from my perspective, it will ultimately get to a point where it does simplify a lot for them and it removes a number of the layers, which we'll talk about a bit later, the challenges of removing a bunch of very large organizations from this ecosystem and how that's going to affect them. But from my perspective, the simplification, using technology to simplify and deliver a much better product offering to your customer has got to be what we're all heading towards and what we should be trying to do every day.
100%. And I think, and this is not an original idea, I absolutely absorbed this from the ecosystem, but ad tech has spent 15 years trying to fix the problems that ad tech has created. And that's great because a lot of those are public traded businesses and have done really well. And lots of people have made lots of money and it's important. And I think one of the things you get within industries like ours can be sniping across it. And actually the important thing is to grow the industry because the public market perception of ad tech is not great.
No,
but it is this roller coaster ride of, like company goes public, explodes, collapses. But in those businesses, real value has been created, but it hasn't been understood by the wider public because if you ask most people, they don't know how an internet ad is served or they don't know how any of the infrastructure works. They just know they get to read the news for free in most cases. So I think there's a wider public consciousness which the industry can come together around. But yes, absolutely evolving from the innovation here is to preserve the platform that's in the middle versus to preserve the kind of purity. And this is obviously like very high level.
Yeah.
The purity of an advertiser wants to show something to someone and the publisher has a way of doing that. How can we minimize the steps, not increase the steps? And I'd say the final point of that is the innovation that's happened is because these platforms, I think rightly, don't trust each other and are independent and siloed. So then you get verification jumping up. People are incentivized to be bad actors because this is how they get paid. Publishers are incentivized to send more bids into the SSP ecosystem that send more bids to the DSPs because the DSPs are throttling because they can't handle the amount of bids and the response is just to increase them.
Yep.
This is a natural response and a good tactic to solve that problem. But what we see Agentic as is the opportunity to rewrite the strategic problem of the industry and kind of not start from scratch, but undo a lot of the things that had been wrong over the last kind of 10, 15 years.
I mean, you mentioned publishers as being the value creators of the sector, but from a power perspective and having control over that digital supply chain and their ability to leverage that, they've almost been at the bottom of that from a power perspective. How do you see Agentic changing that? Is it going to empower publishers further? How do you see the power balance within that ecosystem changing and being influenced by the adoption of Agentic?
So primarily, we think that by getting more money into publishers' hands, they'll be able to activate that to grow their businesses rather than look at trying to save money and keep the bottom line where it is. So we think that liquidity is the starting point for that. We don't pretend to know how to run a publisher business better than any publisher. And indeed, most publisher businesses are different to each other.
Yep.
But I think any business that suddenly goes, well, one of my revenue lines is up 30% and it contributes 40% of my revenue, probably will have something to play with that'll be meaningful. The other side of that is removing the table stakes human tasks from them that they're limited in and creating better insight back from those tasks. So currently, a publisher might get an RFP from a holdco. So we want to target your audience. Of course, the holdco knows what that audience is because I've worked with them for 15 years, but you do the RFP and then the publisher gets an email back saying, "Oh, sorry, we went a different way," or "Look, thanks a lot," or they don't get an email back. They have to chase it. The salespeople have a massive opportunity cost of responding to any RFP because it's time consuming, but it's also mostly routine. So what we see Agentic is doing is filling in the gaps for that, whereby the buying agent is bringing campaigns all the time globally, markets where the salesperson might not be. And that's not as crazy as like pubX has a Tokyo team, though of course we do, but it might be that a publisher in London doesn't have a team in Manchester and they're missing out on spend there. But because the Manchester local office uses our buying agent, this London publisher is picking up on it, and vice versa, and probably more realistically vice versa. So there's that incrementality that comes through that approach as well.
What do you see as the barriers to adoption now for Agentic?
I think getting through the hype, we're in the fog of hype currently, and it's kind of like a lot of people have seen it, they've heard about it, and then they've had demos. We already have obviously a lot of publishers because of the technology we already have in market to help publishers. They're transitioning to Agentic. So from the publisher sale, it's about having those like real conversations about what this does, but showing them a product, which is this person yesterday, that they run thousands of websites. They do the monetization for them. They came off mute to say, "Oh, you've actually got some tech," and it's not just someone pitching at them and going, "Can you sign a contract? This is what I'm going to do for you."
And isn't that the crux of it? Is that they hear so much,
right?
But it's not being backed up with the actual technology layer that's been developed. There's a lot of talk, but actually the actions now, and trying to figure out where that is for these large organizations, which they can feel it all headed in their direction, but actually being given something they can action in short order and pilot and test and use, which was going to be my next question, is how much of this is actually getting used today? Like we're talking about some of the theory, what's actually happening in terms of the volume of and where we are in sort of, I guess, the process at the moment, the stages. Where would you say we are at, and what is it like? What does 2026 look like? What does 2027 look like? Just to give a sense of sort of where we're at.
And who's pushing in the market? Do you see is it a publisher initiative for Agentic, or is it also being driven by the advertisers and the agencies? Be good to understand that as part of Chris's question as well.
Yeah, for sure. So answering the second part first, it's coming from both. So scaled publishers have teams looking at Agentic. They want to understand this. They know about it. It has to be justified alongside current business, because this is not the only thing they're being pushed to. This is our ecosystem, and we're part of the Kool-Aid guzzlers for it. But there are still people that are selling other things to publishers that they're not saying, "Oh, our thing isn't very good." So publishers need to rationalize that to see where the change is. And I think almost there's a huge burden of proof on people like us, because we're not saying it'll be incremental. We're saying it'll be transformative. But then we have to demonstrate that. I think to put that in the caging of 26 to 27, I think Q1 26 was kind of general awareness. And we were kind of on a listening tour, so speaking mostly to publishers and very senior holdco people, and saying that this is kind of coming. We have a vision for this, but how does this sit next to what you're thinking? Because it doesn't really matter what we think if we don't build it for the people who are going to use it on both the buy and the sell side. Q2 then moved through into kind of small testing at the start of Q2, and then we see Q3 as being kind of the beginning of this exponent curve on that. Q4 we think will grow. But we think that Q1 2027 is where we see explosive Agentic growth, because there's been enough groundwork bedding in, but also there are things like advertisers, clients are in direct contracts with existing platforms. So even if they say today, "I'm all in on this," they're still going to have to adopt to it. And of course, people want to test and learn. And we're absolutely encouraging that.
That's an amazing time frame, because if you think about it, from really being socialized as an idea to then being used and tested to being then adopted more fully within the space of sort of 6 to 9 months, because it shows the power of the tool, but also the willingness of the people that are going to use it to adopt it really quickly and seeing the benefit. And I imagine, getting back to one of your previous points, that it's the commercial element to that, the cost savings that can be made, and the incrementality and the benefit that it gives to their customers.
Well, completely. I mean, that gets us in the door, but the philosophy of pubX is that that is the very basic version of this product, is do the economic part of it.
Okay.
We still want to build the best advertising product and system in the world. And because of the scale of Agentic, we can do that. And this is where we get onto the really cool stuff about new ways of modeling. So like user context protocol, using embeddings differently, like vectorizing audiences. All of this amazing stuff that our data science team is focused on doing to ensure that we don't just win on economics, but we actually deliver value and value at scale. So that's the other thing that about Agentic is, and it's not just hype, and it's not just a better economic system. It genuinely is a better technology. But then again, that re-encumbers us with the burden of proof to say, well, this is our vision for this is what we're going to get through. And then what you have to do is work that backwards into, well, what problem does it solve today? And then how can we work with you to build this in a better way going forward, both for publishers and for the advertisers?
So when you're out there talking to publishers, what are you hearing as the top 2-3 problems that publishers are looking to solve with Agentic?
Yeah. So, I mean, beyond the obvious, which is revenue, right?
Yeah,
I think,
which all publishers are.
yeah, but most businesses also pursue revenue growth. That's a fairly reasonable thing. I do think for publisher revenue, though, there's headroom to grow back into, which is just the pressure of the current programmatic ecosystem. So there's no way, and our first product in market 5 years ago was a floor pricing optimization engine that basically pushed back against things like bid shading for publishers.
Yep.
So we know there is headroom for them to grow their revenues into, just because of the pressures of the ecosystem, beyond which, of course, not activating all of your audience all the time, which we think Agentic can get them to. Aside from that, you've got the operational efficiencies angle. So if your sales team aren't having to pitch every RFP, they can focus on value add activities like, this advertiser's spending a lot, let's do a bigger execution with them. We also think, and this is one of Tom Triscari's points that I know you've had on the PubCast before, but it's bring back the homepage takeover. And what he means by that is there's all these amazing high value products that publishers could be selling, but because they have to deal with the day-to-day, they don't get the opportunity to. So if we take the day-to-day again, let them go and sell that. Now, even agentically, let them sell that, but have the opportunity to develop the relationships and do what sales is. So publisher sales teams should be able to spend most of their time with their clients or prospective clients, because the table stakes stuff of activation is done by the agents. So I think it's obviously revenue, but it's operational efficiencies to drive greater revenues and higher yield of new opportunities.
Yeah. And you mentioned, I guess, the nirvana state, which is agent to agent. There's less intermediaries in that supply chain, therefore greater visibility, better margins, all of that kind of good stuff. How close are we to that situation? And then there's a lot of people and organizations that are currently in that middle layer transaction between the buyer and the seller. Where do you see the role of those platforms moving forward, and what are they doing as part of this conversation and part of the agentic movement?
Yeah, so I think, answering the second part first, I think most of those companies are pursuing something agentically.
I mean, if they weren't, they would be crazy,
Yeah.
and they can see what's coming. So you'd expect them to be like not just lying down and letting people roll over them.
Do you see is their role going to fundamentally change as well, from being a pure play SSP or a pure play DSP, and what does that middle layer look like moving forward, if it exists?
Well, so I think the SSPs are certainly moving into agentic, and that's no secret.
Yeah.
We've spoken about some of them already. For the DSPs, it varies, because there's a real range of focus for the DSP. So Amazon have gone to market with an incredibly low price DSP with amazing data behind it.
Yeah.
And that's a strong proposition, right? And they could agentify that if they want. To them, it doesn't matter, right? It's like such a low line on the P&L anyway, but they can go and win that space. Google see themselves as a publisher. They've got YouTube, they've got this amazing inventory, and Gemini AI results I saw yesterday, it's monetized in 0.1% of cases. So the growth there is just unreal, right? That's total headroom, basically.
Yep.
And then you've got kind of the sort of trade desks basis as DSPs in that space that are more what you'd call a traditional DSP. And I think that they're taking an agentic view in terms of what can we add on as an agentic service. And I know that Jeff Green last year was very against agentic, and then they kind of at the end of the year changed that tune and then shipped something. But I think for those platforms, it's not, you can't embrace it as a feature. You have to embrace it as an operating practice.
Yep.
Otherwise, you just risk total obsolescence, or else you have a feature that's overweight your core business. And I think that's one of the key things for the traditional SSPs and DSPs is they're making a lot of money currently by being that platform. This is classic innovator's dilemma, where if you're an SSP in particular, you say, I'm actually betting that my business is not going to be funneled through DSPs in the future, and it will be funneled through agents that maybe I've built, maybe I've integrated with.
Yep.
But at what point do you make the switch to say, well, we're going to cut off that money line, which is enormous. It's almost all of our revenue, to pursue that vision. So I do think there is an advantage to being in the kind of the more like startup scale up part of this industry.
Well, we see it. Financial services is a great example of this. You've got all the traditional lenders, all the traditional banks, who have, in many respects, been like front and center. And then you've got a bunch of fintechs. Right. You've got the challengers that have come in. They don't have that legacy infrastructure. They don't have that whole shareholder board meeting mentality where they've got to keep everyone happy. And when do they transition? They can just focus purely on what the best thing is for the customer rather than what's the right thing for their shareholders. And I think that's the great point. I feel like we're democratizing the ability to provide, things like Revving services, pubX services to a large community of people. Yeah. Without needing that huge amount of legacy infrastructure. And like moving Titanic is a challenge, whereas we can operate nimbly, we can really cut to the chase and actually provide a much better service because of it.
And totally agree. And I think it's one of the problems with being a public company in ad tech in general is that it's such an innovative and entrepreneurial industry, and there's so much change. And Agentic has this is a shifting the industry change.
Yep.
But it's always transitional. And I think it's very difficult to sell that into public markets where you're expected to grow at a steady clip quarter on quarter. And if one quarter you come out and go, actually, we're going back to the drawing board and changing our business, how does an investor that doesn't understand ad tech read that? How does an analyst who does understand ad tech read that when you go, we're killing all of our revenue lines because we're betting on this new technology? So you've got the market perception side of things. We've got a number of people, a decent group in New York and North America, but we don't have 2,000 people in an office in Manhattan that they have to try and find a new world for.
Yep.
So it does mean you can move more quickly. And because, again, as I said at the top, this is a macro shift, that technology is evolving outside of the industry anyway. So if you're running on, as most people are, some version of an Anthropic model, Anthropic are just improving that all the time. So you don't have to do the R&D there. So that's driving the pace. So even if you want to slow it down within the industry, the people that are your buyers, your customers on any side of the marketplace, they go home and they log in, and suddenly they've got a robot at home that's the smart as a god and can do anything they want, and they want to have that work.
Yep.
So it's a really interesting time in this confluence of like general issues in the market for being an ad tech business and this rapid pace of change that's driving outside of it. So it's a great time to be in this kind of space where innovation really is king.
I mean, there's certainly a lot of innovation right now, and the pace of it seems to be increasing all the time. One of the things that still surprises me is, and this is ad tech, but across many other digital ecosystems, is the pace of innovation is accelerating, particularly with Agentic, yet payment flows and the transaction payment infrastructure that sits behind that, it still feels like, it's the same place it was 10, 15 years ago. And certainly payments are not yet part of the agentic conversation as such. There's the agent to agent transaction, but then the payments that happen after that are, still the analog system that it was. How do you still see payments as being an issue moving forward as agentic moves? And how do you think the world or payments are going to change with, increased adoption of agentic and perhaps removing or changing this middle layer of DSPs and SSPs that operate?
Yeah, so I think whilst I'm generally critical, I would say on average the DSPs and SSPs are not really the payment cycle problem, because they're in the middle. So naturally they have to receive to give, but it's the originating aspect which is the issue. And we know that holdcos trade their treasury, and they could they're making money on this. And I think Agentic does help in that holdcos can now make more money because they don't have to pay out these crazy fees to these platforms. But ultimately, I can't imagine that practice will be turned over. So I still think that the kind of service that you guys have is pertinent in that ecosystem. And I think that we don't use you guys typically for
pubX cash flow, we use it to offer better payment terms to our publishers because we could take a small hit to help them grow their businesses. And I think within Agentic, you can pass that along. So it's still putting that publisher first angle on it and getting cash in their pocket so they can grow their business. And it sits within the philosophy. And because we're obviously a very efficient company as the startup scale up space, we've built headroom into the model to do that. So I think it becomes I think it can become part of the fundament that drives that. Because I think if you're saying to agencies, can you change everything about how you buy media and also your financial operating model? This is an enormous ask, and we're not the people to be asking it. So I think if we accept that that exists, that's what we know today. What do we want to be true? Well, really, we want them to adopt Agentic because this is how publishers win and they win. And then they can keep the payments as are, and then use a system like you guys to map the difference.
And I was just going to say that from our perspective, the choice and the optionality, I think, are critical in the same way that you're giving people choice and optionality to be able to use Agentic to improve their workflows, all the things we've talked about. For me, being able to position the Revving solution right in the middle of that, so that when people are setting up these Agentic workflows, they're saying, right, here's the legacy infrastructure. Here's what you can do and what is existing as at today's date. But here's a choice. You can actually set up your Agentic workflow so that when cash is flowing, you can receive it weekly, like bi-monthly, monthly. That's your choice. And actually there's an incremental cost for doing that. And we're not necessarily saying that that's something that should be dealt with upstream, but actually it's almost like absolutely critical that those businesses at the top of the supply chain that are slowing things down are giving everyone below it the choice. I feel this is again, I use that word, that democratization of choice around, you don't have to sign up to net 90, net 120 and wait to get paid. You can actually set up a workflow now where you can choose to do that. And I know that you were both in New York a couple of weeks ago, and we were working on a few initiatives to try and show how Revving will fit into that. But from my perspective, I think that's what's really exciting, is you can change the way money flows and the choices that people are making, and then you can turn that tap on and let it run, rather than being beholden to those upstream payors and what they want.
And I think one of the things that I like about pubX is you've gone out to market with a really interesting agentic product. You've also gone out with a differentiated product in terms of payment terms. So you use Revving to accelerate payments down to your publisher customers. That is a key point of difference when you're comparing against other monetization partners that are out there. When you've gone out to market with this accelerated payment solution or these payment terms, how much of a differentiator is it when you're talking to publishers? What's the feedback been when you've gone out with both this agentic offer, but then also the payment terms element?
Yeah, so I think right now we can look at the legacy products for that, which is like even offering 30 days is perceived as being game changing, right?
Which is so sad.
It is because it's previously it's 60, but it's not really 60 because it's 60 from month end, and then some of that's 90 days, and then invoices get missed, so they go to the next cycle. And our previous business was a DSP working with the holdco, so at the end of every month we'd call up and say, "Where's the money?" And they go, "Oh, we forgot. Sorry, we'll put you in the next payment cycle." And then you're getting to half a year later, and we're a bank for the holdcos. So any shortening is seen as an advantage. I think at this point we haven't coupled it up with the agentic side of things enough to really get that. But I see it as being a major differentiator, particularly as we attack maybe the broader base of advertisers, the longer tail of advertisers, and build it into the system, which I know you guys have done elsewhere as well to great effect. But I think the key is making it just part of the ecosystem, part of the fundamental technology, which is you can have better terms. Do you want them? And maybe if you can do it on a spot basis, then that's great because maybe they don't need them right now, but in Q1 they'd like to pull forward Q4's earnings or whatever it is, particularly with scaled public publishers. But this actually makes a real difference. So yeah, I think it's critical. I think they do go hand in hand, even just philosophically about democratizing access.
Yep,
it's a meaningful improvement that is reasonable and makes the ecosystem better.
Yep. And certainly we recently demoed our transactional-based funding agent, which allows on that agentic to agentic transaction for either the buyer or the seller to opt for accelerated payment terms, the buyer to opt for extended payment terms, and making sure that Revving is part of that transaction and giving that option, because we feel that currently both the buyers and the sellers have been beholden to set payment terms that are caused by, potentially problems upstream or what advertisers are paying. Including that payment term solution and empowering both buyers and sellers to have more say and agency over their payment terms is something that we think is, an important part of the evolution of both programmatic, but then the new, I guess, age of agentic that's coming in, right?
Yeah, I think that if the fundamental question here is how can we fix things, this is one of the things that can be fixed, right?
Yeah.
And it can be done so agentically, and giving people the choice, as you say. So this isn't all or nothing, but also doing it in real time. So it's not, well, I need to commit 4 months to signing up to this process so that I can, where will I be in Q2 next year? Because, this is bringing everything down to that real-time decision making, and giving that choice over the extent to which you use it as well, which is also unique. So I think you can see why this hasn't necessarily taken off historically, but it's creating it as part of the flow, which I think is really different that you guys are doing, and I think is meaningful from a user experience perspective.
Yeah, I mean, payment terms should be a choice that either side of that, either participant of that transaction can choose into, right? As opposed to being dictated to by 3 rungs up the ladder of that digital supply chain, and then everyone else is beholden to them. And as a result, you have all these intermediaries that are having to put float or invest working capital into managing payment terms, so that, the ultimate beneficiary upstream, i.e. the advertiser, is, treating digital supply chain like a piggy bank in many respects.
Completely. It's not even about the delay, it's about the inconsistency of it as well. And it's how you gear and build your business when you've got this massive lag between activity and receiving the capital for it. So everything becomes a lagging indicator. The whole business is working behind. If you give capital up front, you have different decisions, right? It's like if we're venture backed, if we raise money and we know that we've got money for 2 years, you make different strategic decisions than if you're running month to month. And you get to the end of the month and you go, oh, actually we were below forecast. What happened? And then you have to think about how you change next month. So bringing capital forward, it changes the way businesses can operate, which is hand in hand with what Agentic does. So it's like quicker access to probably more capital and the ability to develop high quality revenue sources over the top of that. And it's this kind of like perfect crucible of how to fix the world for publishers and the supply side, who, as you say, and I think this is probably why they've been at like the bottom of this, is that it just kind of trickles down to them. But now they can take control over it. They don't have to use it if they don't need to. If they're public and they can raise money in the public capital markets, great. But as an option to have it, it changes their businesses.
It's a real power shift, I think. I think getting back to that original part of the conversation, where it was always probably built to be a bottom up, but ended up being top down. I think we genuinely are in a position, I think, over the next year or two, where you're going to really enable the publishers to take much more control over so many elements of the things that they previously had no control over. And that's really exciting for me. I thought maybe, like, to finish up, we could just talk a bit about some of the things that, if we crystal ball gazing, I love these parts of the conversation, and looking forward. And then we touched a little bit about what 2027 looks like, but actually let's shut our eyes 3 years down the line. Like, what do we as like partners, like, who are working together?
Blue skies, right?
Yeah, it's just like, where do we see things being, and what do we actually think can be achieved? Because I think it's probably my personal view is, I think we're going to see achieve a lot more than others are possibly thinking at the moment.
Yeah, so I love to let my mind wander into this place, and fully half of my mental capacity is living in that future.
That's most of the agentic advertising.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, I have a mentor who says, in ad tech, if you think a quarter ahead, you won't get there, which is the other half of my brain. But wandering into this, currently, I think you see a massive ecosystem shift towards I do think agentic is inevitable. I do think this is the way media is transacted. And I think in 3 years from now, it's normalized. I think we've probably gone through the kind of termination shock of the current, which is, this is how media is transacted and has been for a decade and a half, this is quite a young industry. For a lot of people, that is a great deal of their careers is spent in this paradigm as it is today. So I think we've gone through that. And I think businesses are realizing
how and where to create value within an agentic world. And again, we don't pretend to tell agencies how to run their businesses or publishers how to run their businesses, but there will be more capital in more efficient businesses. And I think that this is when we can start future-proofing the industry, because we can innovate for the industry. We can innovate towards the outcomes. So media agencies can build better experiences, relationships with advertisers to scale into that future, because publishers have greater offerings and net new innovations that are coming out. There is modeling that drives better outcomes, increasingly activating audiences in ways that literally don't exist yet.
Final question for me is, who do you think the winners and the losers are going to be?
It's a great question. So
I the best to last.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, obviously think two of them are in this room currently.
Yes. Well said, Andrew.
I think it's interesting because we are venture backed, as I said. So I get asked by investors a lot, what is the long-term vision and where does it go? And I think the scaled businesses in agentic are probably not known or well known currently. And I don't think we've got those behemoths yet, which I do think will happen. I do think naturally it will aggregate to a few players, hopefully with a democratized take on how to actualize this in the marketplace. But I don't think they exist yet at that scale.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a conversion of a current large company to be the agentic winner. I think agentic will promote net new companies to that stage. I obviously think pubX is one of them, and we're aggressively hiring excellent people currently to make this happen. We're growing in all global markets, and we're getting great feedback. But principally, I hope it's the publishers, because these are the people that drive value.
I was going to say exactly the same thing.
This is they deserve to win. They have the same great environments, and they're hammered by all of the things we discussed above. An algorithm changes and suddenly they don't have as much traffic anymore. So they didn't do anything. They haven't stopped creating great content, great environments, great audiences, but they've just been punished by something that's completely out of their control. So, but you said it earlier, but putting them back in control, I really hope they're the winners, and we see the open web thrive for the next, it's certainly 3, 5, 10, 15 years in some form. But then there's new channels. So what does advertising look like in an LLM environment itself? What happens to do Anthropic do advertising? I know OpenAI kind of flip-flopping, but this is no doubt an environment of attention and audience with amazing intent. So naturally, that is where ad tech typically flows. So there'll be companies currently, and a friend who runs one, and that's exactly what they do, who will be massive. But as yet, they're working through those early days of it. So it's one of the things I won't be drawn on to say like absolutely guaranteed, but I do think there's a lot of exciting companies that like us and that we know who will be the massive businesses of the future.
Brilliant. Gents, that was fantastic. Really enjoyed it. Andrew, thank you so much for your time and for joining us today. Great. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for coming in, Andrew.
Cheers.